Right, so good afternoon everyone and welcome to this webinar. This one's called Private Sector Market View. It's number 6 in the IIM's Summer 60 series of short webinars covering topics derived from the Institute's 2020 survey output. Today we're going to be taking a look at the current market in the private sector, what trends are developing, the impact of COVID-19, and lastly, how the market might be set to recover. My name is Bruce Rayner. I'm an interim CEO, mostly working recently in private equity-backed businesses, and I'm a member of the IIM board. My colleague Dominic Mason is on board running the engine room. I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by representatives of 3 of the consistently highest ranking ISPs as voted for solely by interim managers. These guys are truly ISP royalty. They are Steve Deverill from Eton Bridge Partners, Doug Baird of Interim Partners, and James Humphreys from Wilton Bain. Welcome, guys. The format is a Zoom webinar with, broadly speaking, half of the time allocated for the guys to share their thoughts and the remaining time for your questions. Can I ask that these will be handled via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen? Please feel free to submit your questions as we go along, but we're going to handle these in the second half of the webinar. We're recording this webinar, and this will be made available on our YouTube channel, to which you are all registered, the YouTube channel that was registered when you signed up for the event. Without further ado then, I shall hand over to Steve to introduce himself and to get things underway. Steve.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Crikey, that is the first time I can honestly say I've ever been referred to as royalty. So that's lovely. Thank you very much. Delighted to talk today on this subject. I will just share my screen and I'll be able to take you through something which I prepared earlier, which hopefully will give a viewpoint on the private sector in the coming months, really. I think we can all agree it's been an extremely challenging last 6 months, no doubt about it, without using the word unprecedented times. We look at the first quarter, and there's no doubt actually, we had an extremely strong start to the year. Interim was good, the search practices were doing exceptionally well, and we were coping with the situation coming through from the I-35 reforms and changes. And then we were all hit on the 23rd of March by the announcement from Boris Johnson that the country were to be locked down. Interestingly, just 5 days before this, there was a deferral announcement on the I-35 reforms that happened on the 18th of March. I think we can't look, there's obviously a correlation between the two, and I think overall the government saw what was coming, how challenging it was going to be, and inevitably didn't feel it was the right time for IR35. But quite literally overnight, there was a huge change in mindset of our businesses, with people trying to ensure that people were able to work remotely, ensuring that they could keep their operations running, really tried to understand the point around furloughing and who would qualify and who wouldn't. And most importantly, as all of our clients were doing, they were looking at cash and their cash position. If we look and consider that the lockdown remained for the best part of Q2, with easing announced on May the 11th, then with non-essential travel throughout that entire process, it's not overly surprising that the biggest hit sectors were the service industries. This next slide demonstrates exactly that, I think, because if we consider air transportation dropped by 92.8%, travel agency, tour operators and other reservation services, 89.2%, food and beverage services, 88.5%, and then you can see wholesale and trade accommodation, all with huge levels of the drop in the growth for themselves. Other industries that we saw that were impacted, so certainly construction was impacted by this change. Public transport was another that was hugely affected, as was charities, leisure and tourism. Sports events were cancelled across the country. And shopping, certainly in its physical aspect, a number of retailers tried to pivot and move and hedge by going to their online capabilities, but there was no doubt about it. The outweighing of the lack of people in their shops had a detrimental effect on the sector overall. Those that succeeded were pharmaceutical, healthcare, life sciences, media streaming services did well, cybersecurity. I'm sure everybody will always remember COVID for Joe Wicks and the ensuing online fitness craze that, that followed suit. And online platforms such as Zoom, Teams and others that were used as well helped these organisations to thrive. I picked this interesting format up actually from the FT, and I thought this was a really good way of looking more globally at some household names and how they performed during this whole process. At the top there you can see Amazon, which is probably no surprise to anybody, but an absolute astonishing amount of market cap increase of £401 billion during this whole pandemic. Consumer behaviour changed. We used Amazon for absolutely everything that we needed, it seemed. And Jeff Bezos actually had to invest £4 billion in virus mitigation of his supply chain to ensure that it could continue to help the general public in that situation. Second on the list there, and by no mean feat, but still only at 269.9 billion market cap increase, is Microsoft. And it was the use of Teams app and Azure Cloud, which became the digital backbone for many businesses and people working from home that saw this. Apple are never too far behind in these situations, and with people upgrading their technology whilst working at home and moving much more to the wearables side of things with the fitness craze that ensued, they did exceptionally well. Without going through each and every one of those, it's very clear which areas, which sectors thrived during this period. Just to pick out a couple, I mean, PayPal as well in the mid-range there at 65.4 billion market cap increase, were the online payment platform of choice and did exceptionally well. So what does this show you? I mean, I think the interesting point and the reason that that is so relevant is it's incredibly evident and obvious the correlation between the significant change and shift in consumer behaviour and the businesses and sectors that thrived. On a very simple, in a simple way to look at this, if we look at our behaviours and how we changed, everybody shopped from home, which led to e-commerce on online delivery thriving. Organisations that would have done well, we've just mentioned, Amazon, Shopify and Ocado were ones. Entertainment-wise, people looked towards social media, telecoms, gaming and TV for their entertainment rather than going out, which led to the other organisations on that right-hand side doing particularly well. The home working point is one, and a very interesting one, because not only did the technology, connectivity and communication organisations do well, but if we look at the sheer move towards home working, this accelerated the pace of digitisation across the country, well, across the globe, in fact, by some 3 to 5 years is estimated. The exercise piece that I looked at before, I think consumer behaviour again moved with people cancelling gym memberships. The edict from Boris to escape your home by doing any form of fitness you could led to these organisations doing exceptionally well. There was actually 100,000 deficit in bike shortages from Humphreys and others. And that shortage continues even now. So if we look forward to, from a supply and demand perspective, we can assume that these are organisations that are going to continue to do well on the other side. But I think the big question that will inform upon the future performance of any of these organisations is whether or not these consumer patterns and behaviours will remain in place. I think we can probably assume that home shopping wise, elements of that will remain. More people will now be online having learned how to do it. And I think that will in turn point other organisations to pivot their businesses and meet their demands of the public now. I can very much see entertainment levelling out again as sports and hospitality moves on and opens up. However, home working, of course, looks like it's here to stay. And I think for organisations that get this right, it's actually going to provide them a competitive advantage going forward. But from a sector perspective, we're going to think that technology will continue to do well. So if we're going to then look at the last couple of slides fresh in our mind and then look forward, and try and answer the original questions posed. I think the obvious sectors are there. It's unsurprising. It's not going to come of any great surprise to anybody. Technology, pharmaceutical, healthcare, e-com and logistics last mile. Interestingly, just a point on technology and pharmaceutical, it was reported that M&A activity for both of these sectors are now back at pre-COVID levels, which I think is hugely encouraging to fuel the rest of the market and the interim market that we need. However, rather than just looking at sectors, the takeaway I'm keen for everybody to see it's actually going to be, in our opinion, the characteristics of an organisation that are going to make it or break it in the coming months. And I think the key thing is businesses which are able to embrace change quickly enough, that show agility, flexibility, that show levels of innovation and creativity are the ones that are going to thrive. Classic examples during the process were organisations like Brewdog and Anheuser-Busch that pivoted their business very quickly to move to hand sanitizer. The restaurants chain, Leon, very impressively changed their 65 shops into ready meal outlets in which they set up a click and collect and a delivery service. It's that ingenuity and that ability to move and change that meant that they moved from their competitors that were struggling in that particular market. And so a knock-on effect, we look at characteristics for the successful organisation. Well, we need the right characteristics from a leadership team as well to actually take those organisations up and through. Things like the 5 C's of leadership: character, commitment, courage, confidence, and communication. That's what we're going to be looking for as ISPs and executive search businesses. Leaders who can show levels of agility, adaptability, and flexibility, and can see the opportunity. This market is going to play into those who can tap into their entrepreneurial flair and spirit and take it forward. So finally, I just wanted to touch upon IR35, which is also part of the brief. And I think, as I said from the outset, we're all anticipating that it will come through in 6 months' time. In terms of the impact, I think clients will need to be a lot clearer on what they are hiring an interim for and their role within an organisation. And I think it's going to empower the interim to say not only what are they there to do, but what they're there not to do. So that will be much clearer. I think we're going to see a rise in the level of people that move to a portfolio career. I think IR35 will have a knock-on effect to that, of course. So if you can demonstrate multiple clients, it's much more likely you would be determined outside, and I see people doing that. And I am an optimist. I'm an internal optimist, and I'm going to say that I anticipate that there's going to be a better rollout of the changes than last time. So mark my words, I don't know how confident on that I am, but I'm certainly hopeful that that will be the case. And what will we be doing? Well, we, of course, will be helping to educate clients as we did before and try and assist with early determinations. We're going to ensure that every assignment has had an independent assessment alongside it. And what we also want to do is help to educate you, the interim community. And we want to empower you to be prepared to really challenge any determination that doesn't feel quite right. Independent evaluations are not overly expensive at all compared to the life cycle of a contract. And we would encourage, wherever possible, to ensure that you do stand up to the blanket determinations that we saw in the first place. Although, like I say, I'd rather hope that it will be a slightly different implementation this time. That's all from me. Looking forward to the Q&A session in which I can hopefully answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Questions are already coming in, which is great. Keep them coming. But some really interesting thoughts there from Steve. We'll now move over to Doug Baird. Doug, over to you now from Interim Partners.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks, Steve. Steve, you raised some really great points there. I'm not going to focus on the macro, if that's okay. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the micro. Sorry, guys, I don't have any slides, but I'm going to just talk you through about our personal experiences of what COVID's done, the state of the market, how we're seeing the recovery, and I'll touch on IR35 as well. I'll start with the state of the current market. Well, I'll echo Steve's words. It's been pretty dire. I'd love to have my recruitment sales hat on and tell you guys what a marvelous experience it's been. It's been a real challenge for us, for our clients, and for our candidates. So in terms of where we are as a business, our revenue's down, but it's not as down as we, we're not down and out. It's not as, it hasn't fallen as steeply as we'd originally forecast. So let me just give you a little bit of a sense as to what happened and then what we think the current market's looking like. If I look at our services, we, like others, we provide a range of services. Interim management's key, obviously. We also provide executive search, agile talent solutions, and we also deliver board and leadership assessments. Our interim revenue stayed up quite nicely to start with. It's ultimately tailed off to be just over 20% down. So you know, I'm sure Steve or James or others, you know, if they're up, I'd say hopefully it's not at our expense, but it is down. And so where did we see the falls, particularly within interim management? To start with, we saw it in financial services. It was more aggressive, and interims that we had working, particularly in the city and financial services centres, they were sent home, and we weren't seeing them being re-engaged as quickly as we had hoped to work remotely. And that was quite interesting, because we thought that some of the financial services clients we had would be better equipped to deal with the challenges. What they decided to do was just say, no, let's pause, let's put this on hold. And it's funny, actually, there was other sectors that we saw that ultimately adapted better to the challenges that we had. So incidentally, on our Agile Talent Solutions part of the business, I won't be all doom and gloom, I promise, Bruce, but on that side of the business, we were particularly concerned, because we've got in a business that we used to call Brightpool, we've got hundreds of contractors, and these are all in financial services. The vast majority of them were sent home and were told, you know, see you when we see you. And that was a real concern to us as a business. But within the contractor population, not the interim space, so I appreciate it's not for a good part of your listeners, but within that space, we were really pleasantly surprised that some of the retail banks got them back home working, and they did this by physically sending their kit and telling them you've got to have a wired connection and plugging in. And I think a lot of them are in fairly doing regulated pieces of work. So, you know, there was a desire to get them moving again. But that I'd say is distinct and different to what we saw in the wider interim space within FS. I'll just touch briefly on our other services. You know, it's what we saw when we went in. We saw a lot of our search mandates pulled or paused, but we saw real positivity with leadership assessment and development. And we saw lots of customers saying to us, you know, how are we going to inspire our guys? How are we going to support them through this? What's going to happen? Should we look at coaching? And some of the work that they were doing, whether it was board assessment, that carried on exactly the same, and the leadership stuff carried on exactly the same. I'll give you an example. We were dealing with a company, it was actually Babcock, and we were doing a global assessment piece for them. And one of our guys, John, he was flying all over the world, helping them with this. And within a few days, they said, not to worry, you can go to Teams. So that was where we were beginning to see customers adopt remote working and be really happy with the tech. And with things like assessment, we thought to ourselves, you know, are people going to be happily moved from a face-to-face assessment where you can glean a huge amount to an online assessment? They have, and some of our clients have as well. So that's good news. So overall, we saw a mixed bag when we went into this. Like Steve and others, we were pretty shocked. We hadn't planned for a pandemic this year. We planned for lots of other things like a rebrand, but sadly not a pandemic. So we went into this you know, a little bit bruised, thinking what will this mean to us? But within a month or two, as I say, we were pleasantly surprised that some of our customers were re-engaging. On the interim side, business support services was mixed. Retail and consumer, this was quite a surprise to us, because we thought that that we have a guy, Rich Lindsay, he's involved in leisure, retail, consumer, particularly around leisure. And we thought this would be brutal for him. In fact, it wasn't. He had a number of interims. They were looking at property and, you know, how they could get out of leases. We had others looking at how they could accelerate projects. We saw some saying, you know, how are we going to pivot? So all of those great stories that Steve was telling us about some companies thinking, you know, how do we move from, you know, beer to hand wash? We were seeing that as well. And it wasn't necessarily driving lots of new work. It was in some places, but what it was doing was it was keeping our interims engaged. The projects were continuing. So that was good. And then lastly, if I look at manufacturing, we lost some interims that were literally, the projects came to an end, but weren't re-engaged. But some of those that were particularly involved in projects that may be around the shop floor, you know, operations, manufacturing directors, that work came to a bit of a grinding halt. Others that were involved in other aspects, technology or things that could be done a little bit more remotely, continued. And then I know we're talking about the private sector, but I would like just to quickly mention the public sector. The public sector, we saw fare much better, which was completely the opposite of where we saw in 2010, where public sector interim took a real battering. We've got some real strengths in our business in places like health and local government and social housing. In social housing in particular, it didn't miss a beat. It just carried on. They were sent home, worked remotely. and revenue remains exactly the same. So overall a mixed bag, but I'd say, you know, declining revenue in interim management, but nowhere near as brutal as we thought it would be. So what's been the impact of COVID on our business? Well, it's been fascinating for me as an owner manager in a recruitment business. We were fortunate. We moved to a product called Salesforce last year. We used to run this horrible product called Profile. If we'd still been running Profile and thin clients, I think our team would have struggled to get on, but we were lucky that we moved into the cloud, and that made, and everybody in our business has a Surface Pro, that made engaging through Teams, through Salesforce really, really easy. And for us, we responded incredibly well. I was amazed at how quickly people picked up Teams and went with it. I think there was almost two camps, those on Zoom and those on Teams at the early days. We were a Teams adopter, MS Teams, and we did that really effectively. And what we discovered was that it was actually quite easy to talk to our clients and candidates. It's always easy to talk to your candidates, particularly if they don't have anything on, but we were pleasantly surprised how easy it was to engage with our clients. They were happy to share, happy to communicate, and we didn't have those same barriers of, you know, arrange an appointment to see me or talk to the PA and we'll come back to you in 3 weeks' time. It was, you know, hop on Teams, let's have a chat, let me tell you where we're at, let me tell you what challenges we've got. So we had a period at the outset when we were thinking, should we furlough our staff, shouldn't we? But what we discovered was that our clients were really happy to engage. So we started doing a number of online webinars, a bit like this. And one of the things that we found successful was creating small cohorts of people, small teams. So we could have, say, 10 HRDs, and we'd get them together and they would discuss in this type of environment what was happening to them, and they would share, you know, obviously with a degree of confidentiality. And we did that across a number of sectors. And they were really delighted. In fact, they were happy to carry on throughout through most of the lockdown, engaging with us. And that was useful for picking up work and for gaining insights, and also hopefully being a bit more entrepreneurial in our business and saying to people, look, hang on, that's a particular problem. We may know an interim that could help. So what was the impact on our team, on our recruiters? Perhaps they may be better placed, but I think they handled it quite well in the short term and we adapted well. But I think ultimately it's been a challenge. It's caused fatigue. I think there's real challenges. There's lots of benefits in home working, but there's some real challenges as well. And I think if most of my team said, look, we've loved being at home and it's really worked effectively, I would probably have a different view. I think that calling people through video conferencing all the time, I'm not sure it's good for the soul. I don't know if as a people business, that's really the way we want to go. So we're encouraging our guys to come back to COVID secure offices next week. Our offices all reopen on the 14th and we want to go back to a more regular rhythm. Over August, we did open our offices on a part-time basis and encourage people to come back in shifts and get them to acclimatise to it. And we wanted to show leadership to our clients and candidates to say we're open for business, and indeed, you know, starting to have, you know, getting to more regular rhythm with our clients. So, you know, so lots of mixed bag. You know, every time I turn on the BBC News, I was told that home working is really effective. It is. For engagement, and on some levels, I'm not sure it's the best way of winning work. I'd like to talk to Steve and James if they'll share, if they think that, you know, if that is it. But you know, it's certainly been effective in terms of adapting, and certainly the tech has worked, and I think there's been some really innovative ways of engaging with clients as a result. So okay, so that's the market. That's a little bit about how COVID impacted us as a business. What are we seeing in the market and where is the recovery? We've got all our staff back in our offices, as I say, from the 14th, and we're betting on a recovery, albeit a mild one. And if I look at where we're seeing a little bit of hotspots, most of our team are telling us that there's more activity, and I think that's to be expected, because let's be honest, there was no activity, so we're going from not a lot to some, so that's really positive. But on the whole, you know, we are seeing opportunities coming through. What does that mean longer term? My personal belief is I think the recovery is going to be slow and steady and a little bit painful. I don't see there's a big bounce coming, but I think there'll be a slow and steady recovery over the next 6 months. And there will, of course, be people that have a rich theme with a particular client, or maybe in sectors that do better than others, and they may say they're going to fare better than others. But I think overall, if we look at the wider economy, I don't see an aggressive bounce back. I think it will be more akin to what we saw after the financial crisis just over 10 years ago, I think we'll see a year or two of limping forward, albeit slow and steady growth. I think, as Steve mentioned as well, I think there'll be those that pivoted into other spaces. I've got some questions that I'd love to ask the audience and indeed the others, but I think that they'll pivot back in some regards. And I think those that were in spaces that were really impacted, and where they're fighting for their survival, it's fantastic that they pivoted into hand wash or whatever, but I don't think those are sustainable business models. So I think that they'll be needing to pivot back, but into a slightly different way. So I guess the questions I've got that I would hope that people ask me and that I would like to share when we get to the Q&A is things like home working patterns and indeed how we're doing business now. Will those patterns remain in place? I'm not so sure they will. I think that home working will definitely become part and parcel of what we're about. But I think there's a lot of businesses that already have that flexibility, and I think that if they've already got it, it's going to continue. I don't foresee, particularly in recruitment, their move to a massive shift of get rid of your offices and go to home working. We're in the business of meeting people and in the business of building relationships. And if I have to be on a Teams call and it stops right at the point where I'm about to crack a joke or they're about to confess to something really important and the screen freezes, if that happens one more time this week, I'll probably want to throw my computer out the window. So as I say, we're in the business of building relationships. And so we think face-to-face is going to be really important. And I think, so I'm not sure home working full-time is here to stay, although there'll be a blend of that. But I also, I guess going back to what our candidates can do, what our interims can do, I think they should be concerned if we do move to more of an online methodology of working, because all the interims I know, when I think of their presence, their gravitas, their intellect, how they confront challenges, how they engage, how they communicate with multiple stakeholders or teams, how they express themselves, I think they're all going to be real challenges to overcome if they're sitting, like I am, in their home office and trying to build those relationships quickly and impact on a business they've just been dropped into. So for me, I'm really hopeful that we can go back to a semblance of normality, albeit normality being a bit different. So Bruce, back to you in terms of summary. How did it affect us? It was profound, but I think we've come through it okay. Overall, I hope our business, touch wood, will remain profitable, probably because we've got a few fingers and a few pies. We're careful, but it did definitely impact us. We're seeing a gradual and improving position, so I think that's hopefully positive for us and for our competitors and for our customers. We've seen some real profound impact in terms of what COVID has done, and that's going to linger for quite some time. And then I think that we've got a challenging period ahead, where we are going to see a recovery, but it's not going to be as quick and as aggressive as I think some of us may have hoped in May.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, so again, lots to consider there. Questions are coming in. That's great. So let's segue straight on with James. So James Humphreys, Wilton Bain. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and thank you, Doug and Steve. That was a very high bar that you've set. I'm just going to share my screen with you all 2 moments. Okay, so good morning, all. It is great to be part of today's panel and welcomed here by the IIM. And thank you, Bruce, for all of your work last week preparing us for what's going to be happening today. For those of you that don't know Wilton and Bain, I thought it would be quite useful to give you some context on how we're structured and where we play. So today I'm going to be covering off who we are here at Wilton and Bain, give you a current market overview, show you some of the first-hand and again quite micro effects of COVID-19, and also look at the opportunities for us all. Firstly, here at Wilton and Bain, we're relatively new in the grand scheme of interim management, but I thought it's important for everyone in the audience to understand exactly how we're structured and the areas in which we operate, and then I'll go into some sort of more granular detail around some of the trends that we've spotted and some of the troubles that we've faced as well. And Doug, to your point, I'm more than happy to discuss any of these very liberally and very honestly, because I think as you've said, a lot of it has been quite profound, but we've learned a lot along the way. So broadly, our consultants each specialise in a business function. They then have one or two sector majors. We cover financial services, consumer leisure and retail, which, as you mentioned, on paper could have been quite horrific, but had an interesting tale to tell. Business services and TMT, as well as some other spaces along the way. Like Doug, we're part of a broader human capital group, but our interim team here has been doing well over the past few years, and we're delighted to have been in the top 10 IIM Platinum service provider list for the past 5 years, and in the top 5 for the last 2. I mention that because I hope we differentiate as the sort of other quality ISPs do by spending all of our time dedicating ourselves to proactively networking with the interim community and seeking any sign we possibly can in troubling times to get clients to use interims and to spot interesting opportunities early on. And it's no real surprise that there have been some real changes to how interims have been needed of late. So up here, I've tried to highlight exactly what a traditional interim cycle would look like. And from a client's perspective, and certainly to me, traditional true interim puts focus on bringing in top tier talent who can push a step change and upskill their incumbent people. I've highlighted this because this cycle has been severely affected. So in the current climate, I feel that clients have really been looking to actively control their existing team morale and put a pause on taking on extra cost. There are many anecdotal examples which have been reported in the press. So I think most people will be aware of some of the major banks planning to shed people. HSBC were planning on shedding 35,000 people towards the start of the year, but actually put that on pause and repurposed a lot of their FTEs. And I expect that's a move to make sure that they safeguard morale, make a positive statement of intent to their competitors. And you look at what's happened in recent months, and as much as they have been clinging on and you know, trying to safely keep those people's jobs, a lot of those redundancies have been brought back. So you know, there's an important factor there, which is that the pause and the perhaps slightly failed repurposing of people has highlighted exactly why some special skills need to be hired externally, and that you know, gives the interim market some hope. Equally, you know, around some of the posturing that some of our clients did to make sure that they seem like the people that are managing the crisis best. A FTSE 100 client of ours boldly said that they weren't going to put any single person onto furlough or deploy any salary cuts right at the start of lockdown. And even some of our banking clients did not want to be seen to be taking government money from the furlough scheme. And all of this added to all of the delays that we've seen. But as my colleagues in the interim MD space have said, it's not all doom and gloom. The consumer practice, which is led by one of Steve's former colleagues, Jason Romer, and on paper it could have been really tough, but there was an absolute flurry of activity in certain categories that were highlighted earlier, like DIY, pet, food delivery, anything that makes the home and you know, people's lives being locked up better. The major grocers and convenience stores have all fared very well. And I think to your point as well, Steve, you know, a lot of the large pharmaceutical businesses found that pretty swiftly, if they're spending huge amounts of money on clinical trials and want to keep those moving forward, they need to focus on digital and data and how to push those trials forward remotely. So all in all, you know, things have slowed down, but the market's certainly coming back. For me, it's, I mean, cheesy to say as always, but it has been a tale of two halves. I think to begin with, it was how long can we sit here and wait and just hope that things go away. You know, immediately, lots of my colleagues, especially people running legal private practice interim businesses, for example, thought there would be all sorts of opportunities arising from the chaos in things like distressed debt and restructuring. But ultimately, all of these transactions, which often need interim help, those things all needed to pause because any private equity or trade acquirers could settle on what the realistic values of their target businesses would be. And of course, beyond that, the whole hiring process was hit with all sorts of speed bumps. The interview process nowadays is fully VC, and equally onboarding, as you say, Doug, is now fully VC, and really getting your character across has been tough. So, very competent people were struggling to do their best in these interviews, and ultimately any doubt that was sensed by a client usually shut down that process pretty quickly. But as you say, now we've seen lots of clients embrace the new ways of working, and ultimately, to give some hope to this group, since July, we've easily doubled the number of placements we've been making month on month compared to months March to June, which is great. And I truly think that at the very top interim C-level space, there's been a need to move quickly, because without leaders there to calm the storm, there have been all sorts of people losing steam. And without those very senior leaders, I think you referred to the 5 C's there earlier, I think without those leadership qualities, all sorts of people would be adrift without much hope. So that's been good to see, very senior people landing in senior positions. And equally, lots of those people landing in businesses that are timed and owned by private equity firms and needing to make a change quickly. So where we've had the most success and working with people in this group and beyond is, as soon as good people have become available, we have actively promoted them to our clients, gone the extra yard to make sure that we build a very clear proposition to the people that we're promoting great interims to. And it takes time and it takes trust from both sides, but it's really paid off for us. And, whenever there's a small snippet of news which seems interesting, we need to be on the front foot and activate, the best interim, have the conversation with the best interim for that particular scenario and get them promoted actively out to that client, whether we work with them or not. But equally, as you mentioned, Doug, new business isn't as easy on VCs. It's been really trying to do the most you can with the existing relationships you've got, and take as many risks as possible with the proposition-based introductions. All in all, the pipeline we can see, which I think is referred to in one of the Q&A questions coming up, is better than it has been. And beyond September, we feel like we can see a lot of the larger transformation programs kicking off, and things like the security space and digital supply chain that have been mentioned are certainly hotting up quite a lot. Now, importantly, where are we actually seeing big opportunities? I'm going to try and point out some very sort of specific things that have been mentioned to me. I've put some in quotation marks because they've stuck with me, but expanding on those points a little bit and actually putting it into the anecdotal sort of scenarios that our team have found themselves within. Our people and culture practice, which is led by Chloe Watts, has been winning a lot of new work in and around target operating model work and OD projects. Often these are starting really small, and they've then gone on to require more people, because people need to start testing the water around, true sort of small scale interim and proper consulting work before unleashing the cost that goes with tackling a proper transformation in any of those spaces. And our tech and commercial practices, who have kept on top of whatever green shoots there have been, and now winning projects really in and around new products and building, and as I say, and developing the right tools to proceed and win in their respective markets. So things that are generally focused around product and engineering, such as healthcare businesses launching telemedicine properly, or universities launching online learning properly and digital interfaces for their students, has been really fascinating, and it's definitely hotting up again. And naturally, with so many things that you need to prioritize, how do you make sense of what you need to prioritize without just taking the traditional gut feel opinion? And I think that our change and our commercial practices have seen a lot of big demand for data experts at the back end, whether it's master data management or data quality, all the way through to customer analytics and customer experience, and making sure that businesses are going to be able to stand out amongst their competitors more so than ever. So back to short projects, I think customer and brand leaders have been in high demand to do often few days consulting here to lead to bigger brand and sort of reputation pieces of work, which ties into the OD sort of trend that we've seen. And as Doug rightly says, it's all about relationships. So, you know, where can we add value? How can we stand out? And, you know, I think a lot of this stuff will probably come out in the Q&A, but, you know, thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to the next stage.
Thank you very much, James. Okay, so let's move swiftly on into the Q&A. We've got several questions here, which I'll try and group together if I can, because as you can imagine, there are some key themes coming through. If I can kick off, I think, Steve, you mentioned those skill sets, the 5 C's, businesses looking at agility, creativity, innovation, ingenuity, that kind of thing. Are you seeing or are you forecasting that there's going to be a need for a different kind of interim than you guys have been used to placing before, or will it continue as it has been in terms of the skill sets required to deal with the challenges that you're hearing that your clients are facing?
I don't think necessarily a different type of interim, but I think it enhances some of those kind of core skills that are good.
Oops, I think we've lost you there, Steve. Sorry, Steve, you've gone on mute. Let's see if we can pick that question up with James and Doug. Doug?
Okay, is there a different type of interim? No, I don't think there is. I'd love to say something profound, but I'm probably a little bit too old in the tooth. I think I look back to 2007 to 2010 or other instances where the market's been pretty rough. And I think really good interims, what they bring to the table is the ability to deal with challenge, with crisis. And so I don't think this is particularly different. It's a different type of challenge, clearly. I don't think we've all been through a pandemic before, but I don't think too many people went through the financial crash or credit crunch, as we used to love to call it back in the day either. So I think each time we get one of these big things happening, whether it's, you know, 9/11 and the dot-com boom or Brexit, you know, we can joke and say, crikey, you know, what a volatile period we live in. But when we string all of these things together, it's the ability of our really great people to overcome those challenges. It's those intellects, it's problem solving. And I think those are the key strengths of really good interims, whether it's a financial crash or a pandemic. So I don't think we're looking for something completely different. You know, it'd be nice, obviously, if they're tech enhanced, than perhaps some of the interims we may have used in the past. But I would say it's the skill set that Saul's made interims great. That will continue.
James, are you seeing, you know, are you forecasting the same thing?
Yeah, I think Doug's answered that perfectly. I do think there's more of an emphasis on the communications part and being, especially with home working and people being onboarded from afar, how well they can really get their full sort of body language and communication skills across to people has been tough. So, you know, in and around the caring for people's well-being and trying to spot those things when people have just polished themselves for a meeting when they've just been in their pajamas is tougher than it was. You know, when you're usually, you know, sat opposite them all day and you can probably sense other things. But I think Doug, you've hit the nail on the head. It's the skill of a true interim to be able to assimilate information quickly and roll the punches and, you know, get to a point of delivery as quickly as possible. But you just need to do it without ruffling feathers and do it with the skill of working remotely now. And then
segueing into a question from Simon Jones, which is, when will turnarounds start to pick up? I think you touched on this, James. So would you like to just reiterate or come in on Simon's question specifically on turnarounds? Yeah, absolutely. So it depends which pot you're playing in. So we've seen turnarounds begin in the SME market for sure. So we were doing in fact we still are doing a CEO search
and that's a confidential piece of work. But ultimately, that business has been through the ringer around who their customers were. And then it's very hard to bring on board a CEO when a business is needing to be recapitalised at a slightly different value from what it was before. So the turnaround needed to kick off pretty swiftly. They needed to realign to an entirely new customer segment. They needed to keep on pushing forward. They needed to bring their people back from furlough as quickly as possible, and that has definitely started, Simon, and is underway. More so from a commercial point of view and a slight sort of organisational design point of view. The bigger turnarounds, I feel, the ones that have been on a timer. So we're working with an enterprise telecom business around a carve out. And they've not put their foot on the brakes whatsoever. So we started that just before lockdown. We've continued it, and they did drop a couple of people off onto furlough for a moment, but they've carried on hiring and have become very, very good at bringing people on board to keep the momentum up. So I think, in answer to your question, I think there's a lot more to come. Now that we can see PE firms trying to swoop up a number of different businesses, I think there'll be a lot of sort of pure turnaround work coming, and I expect that's going to kick off around October, November, December.
So polish off the turnaround, or polish up the turnaround CV. In anticipation of that.
Bruce, do you mind if I add to that?
Yeah, come on in, Doug.
Yeah, our chair is a guy called Chris Clegg, and he was at a private equity house called Endless for 10 years, which many of you may know is quite well noted for its restructuring and turnaround. Chris, this is Chris's words, so if they prove to be wrong, then we can point the finger at him. But he believes that I think he would distinguish between turnaround and restructuring. I think we could describe operational turnaround. We think that's probably happening now, or certainly, planning for it. I think if we're talking about restructuring, he believes that's going to be starting in earnest from November. And he thinks that the winding down of the furlough scheme, businesses having a realization that they're faced with a choice, which is salaries or restructuring, and also coming to the realization that perhaps the market isn't returning the way they thought. So his view is that it's November and to December when the restructuring conversations are going to start in earnest. People are certainly having those conversations with their banks at the moment, what if, but there is still a sense of, all hopeful that the market is going to return much more aggressively than perhaps some of them believe.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So just picking up on that, there's a question come in from Paul Lehman. Behind that, are there any other job roles, for example, finance, HR, procurement, marketing, that seem to be recovering better than others? So James, we'll come back to you on that.
Thank you. So there was a point in Steve's presentation which said cash, and I think that is certainly one to point out within the finance space. So making sure that people are able to manage all of their outgoings and just try and navigate where their full sort of dip in their cash line is going to be has been key. So finance has come back in it in a number of shades there. There's on the finance/strategy side, there's been a lot of work in M&A being planned. So we have seen some of the big people that have been in the paper recently, like the AA and others. They are all working as hard as they can in and around what's potentially quite an active M&A market. So I think finance there is recovering. For marketing, I still think that a lot of the projects that Jason and I being aligned to the customer and growth practice here have come across. They've been short bursts, and they've been, can you help us with a small piece of consultancy in and around our brand and our reputation, or how we should plan to uplift our e-commerce or re-platform our e-commerce to cater for what's going on, and that ties into procurement. So digital supply chain work that again Jason leads has been huge, but it's been more buoyant already in the smaller businesses as opposed to the bigger businesses.
Thanks. So look, nice to see Steve's managed to get his tech back and working. So just picking up a question from Janet, Steve, if you can hear me. And Janet asks, it's interesting to see that Audi and Tesla were in the list of companies that have done well. Steve, is there a reason for that, if you're there? Steve, I think we've lost Steve again. So we'll park that question. And we'll move on to another question from Janet, which is kind of similar to a question that Michael has posed around IR35. The question was, which companies are providing IR35 determinations? And another question around IR35, are the panel seeing clients already assessing new assignments in line with the future IR35 regulations? If so, what are the preferred structures? Umbrella companies, for example, are being set up for assignments that are clearly within IR35. So a couple of questions there on IR35. Doug, would you like to just come in on that? IR35.
All the commercial questions, Bruce. I'm not an IR35 expert. Luckily I've got some people in my business, but I'll give it a good go.
Good.
I think one of the questions was, are we seeing clients talking about IR35? In our opinion, not as much as they were in the spring. In the spring, it was hot news. We were really pushing it, promoting it. We were talking and providing advice on determinations and best structure. We had a number of consultants in, and we were even charging for some consultancy around it. That has really gone away. I suspect it'll be coming back again in the springtime, but we're not seeing it at the moment. We have seen some customers who've actually put everything in reverse, knowing that it's going to come back. And I don't want to name names, but they're in financial services, so they've aggressively put it into reverse and gone, IR35's gone away for a year, we'll worry about it again. That's a surprise because so many of them were concerned of it at the time, but they're sort of making good. You know, we do see that it will come back, but you know, we as a business, we were pretty well planned for it, and we think that it will be as it was, which is making sure we provide the right advice to our customers about what the best structure is for them, if they're inside or outside of IR35. You know, we will hope to work with our clients on what is the best status determination, but you know, we took a fairly black and white view to it last time round, which was to make sure that people were either PAYE umbrella or could genuinely sit outside of it. So we encouraged our clients to take the same relatively polarizing view.
Yeah. James, anything to add on IR35?
Yes, I think there will hopefully be less of a knee-jerk reaction. I think putting the last few months in context, we had a big hit in and around what was happening with IR35, and then we've had you know, slow growth because of what's been happening with COVID. So I think that, as Doug rightly says, that there's less of a focus. And actually, right now, to determine someone's status is neither here nor there, because the liability sits with the interim manager currently, and certainly does till next April. So a determination could be suggested, but it doesn't need to be gospel. So you know, that's an important factor. But the fact that businesses that were on the front foot and did get their processes lined up pre April 2020, I think they're going to manage things a lot better style come next year. And I think that that the businesses that had really not planned for it at all are going to be much more aware of what's happening. So again, I think you know, the status determinations and the independent reviews of particular roles are going to be pretty standard come next year.
Mm-hmm. And is there a trend moving towards managing portfolios and multiple clients? Are you seeing any of that, guys? So Doug first.
Not especially, no. I don't think you know, we'd describe seeing that trend, I think, is the short answer. You know, certainly when we talk to interims, you know, if we look at the age profile of when they enter interim management and you know how they exit, then clearly people do, as they get towards the end of their careers, want to move to a portfolio approach. But I can honestly say we're not seeing anything that's due to COVID or other that's changed that strategy.
Yeah, and would you echo that, James?
Yes, apart from the ones that have been as a result of a client wants to bring on someone part-time for those OD projects or short-term branding and reputation projects that I've mentioned. I think there's not been a huge appetite from traditional full-time transformational interims who do 5 days a week in assignments to try and blur the lines in their favour around IR35 by taking on portfolio positions. Naturally, the people that are a chair here and a chair there and an advisor there continue to do what they do, but I echo what Doug said.
Yeah. Okay, so look, we're coming up to the hour, 4 or so minutes left. I think apologies from Steve. He seems to have had a technical issue with his microphone, so I'm not sure we'll see Steve back again. But thank you very much for his contribution. But just to wrap things up with the final question, where do we see the hotspots for interim management over the coming months? Now, you guys have kind of touched on this, but if we can just kind of summarise this over the coming months, hotspots for interim management. James, if you can pick that one up first.
Thank you, Bruce. So I'm going to answer this in a way that works as to how our team is structured. So functionally speaking, rather than necessarily sectors. And if I can, I'll drop in some of the hotspots. But in the people practice, it is OD heavy. So anyone in and around HR that has been in a transformational role in HR should be thinking about whether they do have an OD skill set and what they can do in terms of learning from home in the meantime, because I think that's going to be a hot spot, which is generally I think not a particularly saturated market and doesn't have a million great operators in it. Equally within HR, I think there's been more emphasis put on HR systems. So people having things like Teams and HiBob and all of these different CRMs that manage their people, where they are, when they're coming to the office safely, and all those things could be really interesting. So that leans into the HR transformation and then systems and program space. I definitely think that product and engineering, and I say those two things quite closely together because, products is technical and it is marketing put together nowadays. I think that's a very, very key hotspot. So that could be that you are a strategist and a marketer coming up with something that is going to help customers get the maximum amount of their memberships from home. Or it could be that you are part of a CTO team and you're building something and you're building it quickly and you're building it directly for an audience, including the CEO, because it's so high priority to get out of the current chaos. Beyond that, I think data is an obvious one. So I mean data, not that you need to be a rocket scientist and sat there with a PhD in physics, but equally that customer analytics piece is important, but the programs that underpin all of the potential that clients can unlock through getting data right is going to be really important.
Doug?
Well, I'd echo some of that, but I've got 3 words, and I'd say cash, HR, property. I don't think you go through a crisis like this where cash is drained out of businesses and come through it with ease. So I think anybody that can support businesses with how they handle cash or conserve cash or cut costs, I think that's going to be big in the short term. I think HR, for lots of reasons, I think it could be on one end of the spectrum down to reducing the sizes of a business by letting people go at the end of the furlough period. It could be through mental health and well-being. It could be through restructuring. So it's all of that sort of stuff. So there's a huge around people. And then lastly, property. I think that if we're going to talk about restructuring in the coming months, it's definitely going to involve property. That's going to be an easy win. If we've got lots of home workers, there's going to be businesses up and down the country going, how can we restructure our property portfolio from an office point of view, or even from a retail, or even from a factory point of view? Can we slim it down a little bit and make some savings there?
Okay, we're just coming up to the hour then. So I would just conclude by saying I hope all the participants found that useful. I certainly have. To be able to get these 3 guys in the one room for an hour, I guess was probably going to be near to impossible in the physical world. So a huge thank you to James Humphreys, Doug Baird, and to Steve Deverill for what has been an absolutely fascinating hour. The next webinar in the series will be broadcast, will be advertised on the IIM website, so please get your bookings in. And this recording will be available in the coming days to be viewed again on the IIM website. So without further ado, thank you all very much. Stay safe and have a great day. Bye now.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks, Bruce.
Bruce. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Doug.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.